Today I'm making some teeny tiny bunting. My niece saw this strand I made and she requested one of her own in her favorite color. Pink, of course, always pink. If you're not a fan of the traditional triangle bunting, stick around. I'm going to show you a couple different shape and finishing options at the end of this video. This bunting is much smaller than most of the other bunting I've seen, and it's for a very specific reason. I chose this size because I'm working from my scrap bin. So I don't have a lot of really big pieces to use here, so I did a nice 4-inch strip and I cut from there. And it doesn't hurt that I think this size is really stinking cute. This is also a great way to use up some of your smaller scraps. You can make crumb blocks or crumb strips and then cut your triangles out of there. You just want to make sure that none of your seams end up right in the center of your triangle point, because then things get bulky and it's harder to get a nice point. I'm cutting my triangles using this specialty 60-degree triangle ruler, but if you don't have one of these specialty rulers, most quilting rulers have a 60-degree angle line on them. On this one, here's my 60 degrees right here. So I would use this line to cut my triangles. So I'd lay my fabric out, and then I would align this 60-degree angle along the bottom, and then I'd make my cut. It's just a little, this ruler is just a little big and unwieldy for these teeny tiny triangles. But this triangle ruler really is just simpler, easy to use, and not so much to have to move around. If you're interested in a triangle or a ruler like this, I'll link it in the description box below. So I'm going to be lining up the bottom edge of my fabric with this 4-inch line right here. Like so. And for this first piece, I flip it around and cut from the other angle. I also want to say, don't stress out while you're cutting if your ruler moves a little bit, because this project is really forgiving and precision here isn't as important as it is when you're quilting. If you want to save time, don't forget you can double your fabric over and cut 2 at once, or 3 or 4, however many layers you want to do. If you want to make your bunting multi-purpose, you might consider making it double-sided. So for instance, if you wanted to make it for like family birthday parties, you could make one side the favorite color of child A and then the other side the favorite color of child B. So one side could be purple and one side could be green. Or you could do bright colors on one side and more subdued colors on the other, that sort of thing. Also, if you're using a special fabric but you don't have very much of it, like maybe it's some Tula pink fabric you've been hoarding, you might consider pairing it with a coordinating backing fabric so that your special fabric stretches farther. For instance, with this pink fabric here, I only have 2 pieces of this pink, but I have a whole bunch of this lighter pink. So what I'm going to do is pair them up together so that I can put this pink facing out and this will be on the back. Okay, I've paired up all my triangles and matched them right sides together, but before we go to the sewing machine, this is a tip for newer sewists. You can mark your 1/4 inch seam allowance right here by the point so that you know exactly where you want your needle to fall. So I'm just measuring a 1/4 inch from the side of the fabric right there where the lines cross is where you want your needle to stop. But I'm just going to be eyeballing it. Again, this is a very forgiving process. Okay, it's almost time to start sewing, but first I'm double checking that I have a full bobbin, and I'm making sure that my machine will stop with the needle in the down position. As far as seam allowance goes, I would say don't use anything larger than 1/4 inch because we're working with these teeny tiny little triangles, and we don't want to get a bunch of seam allowance all bulked up into the point. Okay, so I have my 2 pieces right sides together, and I'm ready to start sewing. My machine can be a little finicky with these points. It likes to eat them up. So as long as I start slow, or if I advance my needle by hand, I can save those points. That looks like this. And then I can sew as normal, but never extremely fast because I don't want to lose my point. Here I'm eyeballing. Whoop, too far. Oh well. And then you see, since the needle stops in the down position, I can just swing it around and keep going. And we've got our first triangle. I'm done sewing my triangles, and it's almost time to turn them right side out. But first, if you haven't cut off your points yet, you know, all that excess fabric down there, go ahead and cut those off so that they don't end up in your corners. But my handy little 60-degree triangle does that for me. So let's turn these and see what we're working with. Doesn't look like much at first, does it? I'm going to use my purple thing to poke out my points. And don't get too aggressive with this or you could end up ripping right through the point. And I'm not going for a super sharp point. I like a little bit of a rounded point. It looks good to me. And you could take your triangle straight to your iron like this, but I like to do a little finger pressing first. I feel like it's a little more work, but it gives you a neater result. So I'll do that for each triangle, and then I'll take it to my iron and give it a nice press. I finished pressing my triangles off camera because I really don't think any of you need extra instruction on how to iron things. But the next step is top stitching, and this is an optional step. Go ahead and skip this if it's not what you want to do. I just think this comes down to personal preference. I think it is just a nice finish, and it adds a little extra stability to the little triangle piece. So before I start sewing, I'm going to increase my stitch length, and I'm going to move my needle to the left 2 spots. And now I'm ready to get started. The top stitching is done, and we're almost ready to start our very last step. But first, let's just take a minute to do a little maintenance and cut off all these little nubbins so we won't have to do it later. It's time to make some bias tape. Remember, I'm using scraps, so this isn't going to be true bias tape, but it's close enough for this project. So I'm going to make some fabric tape using my 1-inch bias tape maker. I cut my scrap into an 1 3/4 width strip for the length that I wanted, and I just seamed 2 pieces together using a diagonal seam like this, pressed open. I'm going to fold one corner down to make a nice point, and then I'm going to flip over my bias tape maker, and at this point my fabric is going to be right side up. And then I'm going to go ahead and get my seam ripper and use the point to feed it through, just like this. Then when I turn it back over, my fabric will actually be right side down. And I'm going to feed it through like that, and it's going to make this perfect bias tape, just like that. I'm going to scoot it back to like this, get my fabric in order, and then I'm going to get my iron and just press and pull as I go. And don't go too fast because you want to get a good press on this. When I've worked all the way down my fabric strip, I'm going to come back and I'm going to press again. I'm going to fold my bias tape in half and press. And so this will give me a 1/2 inch wide bias tape to work with. Or some fabric tape, not bias tape. And if you don't want to make your own bias tape, there are a lot of pre-made options out there for you. There's some pre-made Lori Holt bias tape at the Fat Quarter Shop. It's really cute. You can also check Etsy for a lot of variety. You'll just find a lot of random stuff on there. And of course there's Amazon. And go ahead and check your local craft store too. So a lot of options. And I'll leave the links for all of these in the description below. And I'll try to link this bias tape maker too. My bias tape is finished and I'm ready to start the last step. So close to being done. Okay, here we go. I'm going to measure about, I think, 7 inches. Maybe I'm going to do 9 inches from the edge to where I want to start placing my triangles. So at this point we're just going to line up the back edge of the triangle, or the top edge of the triangle, with the press mark in the middle. And we're going to fold over and you can start seeing the bunting come to life. Now you can pin these, you can use clips, but since I have my iron out and everything, I'm going to go ahead and glue baste. With glue basting, I've been finding out that less is definitely more. Do not go crazy because this can get messy. So I'm going to go ahead and just do little tiny dots. I'm not even going to do a strand of glue, just dots. Try to evenly space them out. And then I store this upside down so the glue is always ready to use. And then I'll go ahead and start placing my triangles. I like to do several at a time. Just seems faster. Sorry. Then I'm going to come back through and put some more random dots on top of that. 2 per triangle seems nice. Then I can fold over my bias tape and make sure it matches the one on the other side. And then I'm going to bring in my iron to set the glue. And so if you're going to glue baste, make sure that you're not going crazy with it so you don't get excess on your wool mat or whatever pressing surface you're using, and you definitely don't want to get the glue on your iron. It's just a mess, trust me. But I like to glue baste because I don't like to mess with pins. They freak me out, and clips are sort of annoying. You have to keep undoing them, but you glue baste once and your pieces do not move. So you can just take it to the machine and do your top stitch super easy and not have to fiddle with anything. So that's definitely my favorite way to finish these. So I'll do the rest and then I'll meet you at the machine. Okay, I'm ready to sew my last seam. I'm going to top stitch the bias tape to my bunting triangles. But first, I'm going to make sure to adjust my stitch length to 3.5, and I'm going to move my needle as far to the left as I can so that I don't have to move my seam guide. But basically, the goal is to sew as close to this unfinished edge as possible, this folded edge. So the top stitching is done. I have just one more quick little step. I'm going to match up the two triangles on the farthest end, and then I'm going to match up my bias tape, my fabric tape, whatever you want to call it, and I'm going to trim right here. Got my rotary cutter, and I'm just going to trim so that the two ends are even. And then I'm done. Some very, very pink bunting for my niece. If you don't like these triangles, I do have some other options for you. So just a second, let me go get my sample. You can shake things up by using different shapes for your bunting. I get sort of a cottage garden sort of vibe from this. So you can add curves in there. You can change the length of your bunting piece, or maybe the spacing between pieces. I like these two. They have sort of a Renaissance fair vibe to them, like little pennants. And then, okay, it doesn't stop at shape. You can also add some different finishing touches. So these are all reverse applique. You could spell out like happy birthday, or maybe use initials, or spell out a whole name. Just whatever your imagination comes up with. So those are a lot of fun. And I cut all of this out using a Cricut Maker, the shapes of the bunting, but also the freezer paper templates that I used for the reverse applique. So they're more work, but they're a lot of fun. And I think if you did a bunch of these half circles all together, you'd get sort of a ruffly effect that might be really nice, really cute, maybe for a tea party or, you know, maybe a baby shower even. So there's a lot of possibilities. This one probably took the longest. Also, I want to point out that I used some crumb pieces for this piece, this heart. I'm going to be filming a video pretty soon about how I accomplished this reverse applique using freezer paper and my Cricut Maker. So stay tuned or subscribe to my channel, and that'll be coming soon.